Welcome back to yet another episode of Song Considerations. No, not that. Welcome back to another episode of Breaking the Line. I'm Samuel.
And I'm Charleton.
Taking a deep dive into the arts of mime and choreography. And today we're hitting you with part 2 of our presentation structure lineup. You see what I did there? Part 2, because this is the middle part of our presentation of a 3-part trilogy.
I mean, yeah, that makes sense.
We already talked about presentation logistics, and today we're getting into song considerations.
Yep. So when we talk about song considerations, what we're saying is things to think about even before you select songs. So these are things like whether you're going to be going into a church or into a public venue. Those have different implications. Mm-hmm. So which songs are you going to pick and why are you going to pick them? And then give yourself a little bit of strategy going in.
Yep. So we'll hit up some of the examples from different songs that we've chosen and why, and some of the flexibilities, and even why you might have a speaker in that. So stay tuned.
What do you know? The songs themselves.
Wow, we finally got here. No, the actual structure of the lineup.
We finally got here after talking, for
20 minutes here.
Yeah, 20 plus minutes about just the stage itself.
No, but to be fair, that's kind of like, pun intended, the foundation. Mm-hmm. The stage is the foundation which your songs are built upon.
I got that.
Yeah. No.
Kidneys.
So, because we need to talk about those as we consider before we get there. But even before the songs themselves is the audience.
Yep. So we have what we like to call the church versus the public kind of audience. So mostly because when you are selecting songs for a presentation, you need to keep your audience in mind. So first of all, if you're going to a church or something like that, you can assume that people know the gospel. Hopefully they're saved. Right. They have some understanding of Christian messages and principles and so on and so forth. People at churches love mime because it's wonderful. It preaches the gospel. It's very artistic. All that ballyhoo. And then we get into which songs then should you pick? First of all, I like to say Bible stories, especially some of the more obscure ones. Like if you were to do Job, for example, Job is a really difficult song to understand. But if you have an understanding of what the story of Job is, especially if you introduce it, people are like, okay, I get it. And then
lets you play off of that for whatever preaching or next point you have.
Right. Yep. Next is what we like to call Christian application questions, because there are Christian application and general application songs that, for the Christian audience, this is something of, if you are saved, this is how you should then come out of this knowing to behave, or applying this to your life. Whereas for the secular audience, it's a bit different.
Right, I think of Give Me Your Eyes for that one. Give Me Your Eyes isn't the kind of one that I would do in a public venue necessarily, because it forces the audience to not know what to do with it, like as a public person. Now, if you're a Christian in the audience, great. And I think that's where it most directly is aimed at and should be applied towards.
Exactly. Yep. And then also abstract songs. So when I say abstract, I mean songs that aren't exactly the most direct, you could say. So a lot of songs are like literal interpretations of things that are happening. This person is literally getting bullied at school. This person is, literally, fishing, whatever. Those types of songs are a bit more concrete. The abstract ones are
like Fight Inside.
Like Fight Inside. Well, Fight Inside is kind of a hybrid.
Yeah.
Because it is abstract, and then it also puts some concrete elements into it. Think about like Diamonds or On My Own. Those are all just abstract songs that they don't hit a concrete storyline, but they have that message that goes behind it.
Yep.
So take, for example, Diamonds. In Diamonds, it's not literally that a person was in the desert and drowning or being dehydrated.
Drowning in the jet.
Drowning in the desert. You know what I mean? So then, and then finds their nice tall cup of water in scripture. That's not literally what happens. That's metaphorical, but it's supposed to be understood. And usually Christian audiences can get that a bit better because it's already a Christian message that's being proclaimed.
It's within a context, because the other part of that is generally your Christian audience are going to be sit down and watch it versus your public audience, which are going to be passerbys. And so there's some ideas. Abstract songs are not as good for venues that people can come and go during the song. You kind of miss a lot of the aspects.
You need the whole thing for those abstract songs.
Yeah, I will add for the church, always preach the gospel in every presentation.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter that they're Christians. Sure, they may already have a better understanding and theological explanation of sin. You can still go into the topic of it in a new way and portray it. Because part of the beauty of mime isn't you're not just talking about it. You're not just saying Jesus died for your sins. You are showing a visual picture of it, which can hit the heart in a different way than just maybe their theoretical knowledge of it. One example of this would be the song Bombs Away, where though it works for a public audience, and I think you get the idea because there's like kind of a vague storyline that goes through it. The idea for a Christian audience, you can go really into the depths of the wrath of God and the concept of what sin has produced and how it has built upon itself and how God's judgment was upon the world. Like, yeah, so I would say all of that is very true. I wouldn't necessarily go into such elaborate detail for a public audience, but a Christian audience gives that option.
Yep. And then we get more public presentations because the audience, you can assume not all of them, or even might say a majority of them, are not saved. Like, these are our evangelistic type opportunities. These are the times that we would go into the world and preach the gospel. What do you know? It's almost like that we're commanded to do.
Part of what we're supposed to do.
Yeah, weird. So first of all, like celebratory songs. So these are the dancey type introductory songs are great for this because first of all, they are fun and memorable. And second of all, they are good for drawing an audience. So when you first get up on stage, people are already like, mimes, what the heck is going on?
Right.
But when you blast out with, flags and dancing and backflips, people are like, oh, this is really cool. They get a really, good vibe going on, if you will.
Yeah.
And then it draws the audience. So that's wonderful.
Yep.
Plus, usually celebratory songs don't have like a deep message. They're very surface level at most. Totally okay. Because that's not the point. It's to, get them to come.
Especially, passerbyers. That's the thing. You're trying to get people enough excuse to stop and watch.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that you can't do celebratory songs or any of these in both. Yeah,
of course.
It's just things to consider. One thing I love to do with celebratory type songs, you could say that their messages aren't deep, or that they're actually more made for a Christian audience. Songs like "I'm Amazed" we've used as an ending song, which would normally classically be eye-grabbing, not the most like deep message in some way, but it is a worship song. So it's kind of like our response as Christians and how we worship and celebrate the resurrection. And kind of lingers on that. You can have kind of similar messages for a Christian audience and kind of just reorienting it for a Christian audience.
Yep. Another one is the gospel message. Now, of course, doing Christian setting, totally fine. But this is the type of song that it preaches the gospel in more of a like evangelistic, practical type of style, where it's like, you should love Jesus because Jesus loves you. Just like these are the messages of, we have a message that we're trying to give to you, and we want you to accept this. Now, that's not something, of course, you can do in a church, but by doing it in public, these are opportunities to really make a difference in the lives of people who might not otherwise have heard the gospel or be open to the gospel or whatever. So those are wonderful to be able to present in public presentations as well.
Yep, you can get into some of the nuances of the gospel message, but generally you're trying to be as clear as possible. And often when you get into nuance, you get into very difficult to mime concepts. There are songs that do it well, like Propitiation, I think is one. But you also just need to be very clear in how you present it. Because even after you do songs that are deeper parts of our theology, you would want a speaker to explain it just naturally afterwards.
Yeah, because, take for example, like Forbearance. It's a great song, really cool, a bit more abstract. Because you wouldn't understand it without having an understanding of the gospel already. Now, while the message I think is very, very solid, don't do that at a public presentation unless you have some way to explain it, or
we would use it as like a cool introductory song because it's really fun music, and that's about it.
That's about it, which is unfortunate because it is a solid song.
Yeah, wait for the new version coming out in a few months.
Yeah. Hint, David.
Ooh, spoiler alert.
All right, anyway, so another thing to consider is modern or relevant issues. So these are things that apply directly to things that happen today, such as, bullying or temptations or like, peer pressure, things that occur in modern settings that are applicable to just about any audience.
We've also used songs that are more serious issues that we have to be mindful of public audience, things like drug addictions or even self-harm or suicide. Now you need to be careful in which ways they are done and artfully portrayed so that it's not just for, children to see or otherwise, but at the same time could be very relevant issues that can come up and hopefully witnessing to people who are maybe struggling or have families members that struggle with those things.
Yep. And that's, once again, the thing to consider about what your audience is, because there is also a subset of just being public is this
how old?
Is this an older audience or is this a younger audience? So things to
when
consider
we
as well.
present at the fair, when we are in the kind of infield stage, that's where all the kids are. We're just aware that generally our audience members are going to have like kids with them. Or when we're in the more public stage, that generally there's less kids that are just watching for input. So you just have to be aware.
Yep. And then also something to consider for public venues is the message being simple. Now, what I mean by simple is I don't mean like, the most borderline nonsensical.
Give me love.
Stop. But like the types of messages that you get it, such as I think about He Moves, You Move, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Now, maybe that's not one that you would do for a public audience, but the message, that level of message where it's like the point, the theme is just drilled into you, you get it.
The
Like,
lyrics,
you
you've covered it, even if there's no mime.
Yeah. So that's the point of those types of songs, is like you have a very, you could say surface level message, but it's understandable. It's a principle, a divine principle that we're like, okay, this is the point. You get it. And then you move forward with those. Having several of those types of songs makes it so you're not doing like, let's talk about the substitutionary atonement of Jesus Christ. And it's like people are like, and in churches don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
But to do that for a public audience is significantly worse.
Yes.
So having a simpler message, really reeling it back in, helps out.
Right. You boil it down to songs like Freedom Battle, where, oh, that person messed up and they sinned and they're getting consequences for it. Jesus steps in, takes the black sashes off and puts them on himself. That's about as deep as you go with those kind of things. So you can still show them that the message is still there, that Jesus took our place, but in a way that's very tangible.
So there is kind of an irony, as that I'd like to call it, of booking venues, where first of all, if you present for a church, like you book venue at a church for Sunday mornings, for example, or at, let's say, like their monthly festival or something like that, churches love mime. They're will always be like, oh man, I've seen your ministry, love it. You can send them videos and be like, wow, this is great. You should definitely do this. And that is wonderful, except you're maybe missing the point of why your ministry exists.
Yes.
Like if it's to preach the gospel, preaching the gospel to the already saved isn't as good. Now, granted, you can morph your song list into being more of a Christian application. Totally great way to go about it. But maybe churches on Sunday morning isn't the best option. Now, you can do it. I'm not saying don't. I'm just saying use those sparingly.
Yep, you just have to be aware of how you're booking yourselves and what your gospel message is aimed towards.
Right. And then there is an opposite problem where a lot of public venues don't like to have gospel messages being preached.
No.
So crazy, right? So then you'll have the maybe best option. You get this public venue where there's going to be like a captive audience of 1,000 that you'll be able to do mime to. And they said, well, just don't do any, specifically Christian songs. And it's like, well, that also misses the mission of what we're trying to do. Because if we can't preach the gospel, then what are we doing here? We're just being performers. And that kind of misses the point.
No, it's really funny how many people want us for the mime purposes, and then be like, "Oh, cool, can you do a little less of that thing?" It's like, but that's kind of what we do. That's what we're here.
Right. So I've seen some people like to, we'll say, dodge around the issue by doing non-gospel songs that still have the gospel in them or have some kind of Christian application. While that is acceptable, I feel like it might be better just to not do those venues. Like I know it's really hard to get venues. It's really frustrating, but this is why I'm saying this. It's because you got to find that sweet spot where, first of all, you are able to go into the world and preach the gospel, but also you're able to preach the gospel.
Yep.
Because finding those types of venues, really few and far between. I know that a lot of places have trouble just booking venues at all. So being able to find one that meets that sweet spot, even harder.
We've definitely had venues that told us not to come back because of what we did, and some parents who otherwise had issues with what we were presenting. And sometimes I think it's the gospel. I think it's also we have to just be aware of like how we present. I know one of the places we presented, we probably chose a song or two that was not necessary for our lineup that might not have been as child appropriate. And those are the kind of songs where we can go, yeah, we should have chosen different songs and maybe would have a more consistent presentation on that. Maybe not. It could have been for the best or for something else. But you just have to be aware of choosing, as Jesus said, being as wise as serpents and as innocent as doves. You just have to be very wise in these kind of situations and discerning. Let the Spirit lead you on that one.
Yep. So something that we used to do back in the AIM Branson team is we would break the holy mime rule, which is don't talk.
Yep.
So the reason for that is we want like a Tess. She would give us the opportunity that if somebody wanted to talk to any of us in face about the gospel, that we could talk to them verbally, like using words.
Same with our team, yeah.
And like that's a thing that a lot of teams do because there is kind of like we'll say trumping principle of preaching the gospel is more important than not speaking. And, I feel like most people would agree with that.
Mhm.
So what would happen is, like, granted, didn't happen very often, but if it did, Tess gave us full liberties to just speak in whiteface, to be able to preach the gospel to people who asked any questions or were curious about it. Oftentimes, people would by default go to people not in face, just because it makes more sense that way.
Sure.
But if they didn't, there were times every once in a while where we would have people talk to us.
No, and just have a plan for it. One thing that our team is trying to get better at is having a designated speaker who opens and closes the presentation. If opportunity, they'll actually give a short gospel message, or they'll just say something like, if you have questions or want to talk about our ministry, about the Lord, talk to the people wearing this color shirt or whatever, and giving space for people to actually come up, or even looking for people in the audience that might have been affected or want to talk. Having those people who are not in face paint can be a very important part of your ministry. Or even telling the kids that are in your ministry, get your face paint off so you can go talk to people. Definitely done that one.
Yep. Having a designated speaker, very helpful.
All right. Something else to consider, we'll go fast on this section, but just how your presentation time works out. If you have an intermission, if it's a really big long set, or if it's just something where you've got like 2 to 3 songs and you're in and out and done. Just be aware of how much time you're given, and make sure you ask when you're booking presentations. Speaking of speakers, see what I did there?
You just said the word speak twice. Like, I don't know. Is that a pun?
It's a play on words, I guess. But anyway, speaking of speakers and speaking mimes, you can have a speaker. Yeah, that's a thing. I know, we do mime songs.
Yeah, the thing that, you put up and you play music through it, a speaker?
No, a talking person. No, but plan on having somebody speak. I recommend often that they don't necessarily be the first thing that happens. It's really fun if the mimes just start presenting your big celebratory, eye-catching song and everyone starts coming, and then the person says, "Hi, we are," and then introduce your team. I often have like a canned intro of, "Hi, we are. My name is, I'm the blank director or something of this team. Our purpose is to do this. We're here and celebrating this venue with you today. Have you ever seen a mime?" Like some canned type of intro, and then say, "We hope you enjoy the show." It's really simple, but it introduces your name out there and getting people to understand your purpose so they have a context to listen to you.
Yep. Yeah, and typically that person who does the speaking is either like a director or just simply a non-presenting leader. Like, it doesn't have to be anybody in particular.
We've often done parents. It's a great way to get, if you're a youth ministry, getting your parents involved and asking, some of the dads particularly, "Hey, since you're going to be at this venue, would you mind introducing the team?" And you can even give them, a canned intro of, "This is what we'd like you to say," or, give them some opportunity for that.
Yep. Now, to give you a concept of why you should use a speaker, think about, first of all, do you even need a speaker? Because first, when you consider it, we're mimes. Like, we literally are in the art form of not talking. And so to use a speaker feels really counterproductive. However, it is useful in a lot of situations, or it can be. And so use it sparingly, but you can still use it. It's not illegal. Okay?
Right.
The cops ain't going to come for you. Okay.
No, but it is a useful tool of introducing your ministry, giving people a context. I also appreciate it between songs as a transition. Not that you always have to have transitions, but if we're trying to tell a unified story of the gospel, those transition points in between songs to kind of lay down your foundation of like what we are talking about when we're talking about sin. It could be an easy opportunity to put in some Bible verses to show our support of why we believe that this is true. And particularly having somebody closing the presentation out, even if it's just before the last song, so that the last song acts as your application, it gives a way for the audience to have a concrete message that they're walking away with the visual of the mime. So I'd say it's a useful tool. You should use it.
Yep. And it's also helpful, like especially using between songs to help explain ambiguous messages. Now, there's kind of 2 faces to that. First of all, you use it at the end of an ambiguous song to expound upon the ideas, or use it at the beginning of an ambiguous song to help present the ideas, but also not spoil things.
Right, which we talked about Job. If you have the speaker come out and say, "This next one is the story of Job." That's literally all they have to do.
Yeah, we'll leave. Just get off stage.
Exactly. That's what, you don't need to go anymore because the story hits on it. Maybe you have somebody follow up with it, but that would be that perfect song. Introduce the abstract.
Yep. And oftentimes what I've seen amateur speakers do is that they'll get up on stage, say this next song, let's just say for Job, this next song is Job. Now the story of Job goes, and then explain the 3 main points of how the story of Job goes in its entirety, explaining some of the nuances of the mime. And their talk ends up taking longer than the actual song duration. It's like, no, just back up, dial it down. Maybe if there's something that's really unclear. Like, for example, in the story of Job, you can simply say that, Job was a righteous man and he didn't commit sin, and yet he was still punished. What happens? Like, bam, then leave.
Yep, exactly.
So it gives them something to look for, but it also doesn't spoil things that's going to happen, because especially the big crescendo of the song is when God comes out and basically says, "Hey, nerd, I'm God, you're not," and then the song ends. And like that, is jarring, but it also giving a little bit of a primer as to what's going to happen. Yeah. Helps the audience to understand a little bit better.
I often, when I'm introducing songs or in between parts of songs, I will use the title of the song at the very end before I leave, and it'll be something like, and that's why we call this next one Job, or some line like that, so that I'm not saying this next one, story of Job, and explaining it. Rather, I'm saying, have you ever wondered why good things happen to bad people, or why bad things happen to good people? And then going on to maybe a brief, hook, if you would, to draw them into the next song. That way it acts as a way to make them more interested, not just be like, oh, now I know what the story is.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And then another use for a speaker is somewhere, usually it happens in the middle, somewhere later on, like I would say middle is the earliest, and then probably to 3/4, maybe at the very end, to have what I like to call a mini gospel message. Mm. Now, this is, of course, very overt, direct, heavy-handed. This is the gospel, and then
we're Jesus loves you. Lay it all out here.
We're laying it out here, especially because some of the parts of the gospel aren't exactly the most clear in mime, and parts of theology can't be explained in mime. So you're actually having a person speak to give words to those concepts. That can help a lot, especially when it comes to explaining some of the songs and applying that to the gospel. Like, we saw this happen, and how this happened. Well, this is because of this, and applying that then to the gospel. Like, well, you should be saved.
Yep.
And then,
exactly.
Smack him across the face of the gospel.
Yes, just as Jesus did.
Just as Jesus did.
Just as Jesus did.
Yeah. So those are some things to consider. And then, of course, like closing out the presentation. Now, some times for when those should happen. Like at the beginning, of course, we talked about like those introductory parts, either at the very beginning or after the first song, like he said. Same concept for the ending. If you have like the right before the last song or after the last song, either one of those is fine. Some people do between every single song to introduce a song or to explain a little bit ambiguous message. Personally, I feel like that's a bit much. Mm-hmm. Some people don't, and that's good on them. I'm not them.
Right.
They can be wrong. I'm just kidding. But I personally would say use it sparingly. Yeah. But if you feel the need to do that because it would actually, we'll say, improve the message and improve the presentation, sure, go for it.
Yep, just beware. Presentation length. So often you get kind of like what I would say 15-minute blocks. So it's either 15, 30, 45, or 60-minute slots. There's some variation, but it's just a pretty typical thing what you'll ask for. And an easy way to fit songs in. If you have like 15 minutes, often you'll maybe pick one kind of introductory song and like your other two, your main like good message types of the songs. And then from there, it's just kind of a balance of that ratio. If you got a 60-minute lineup, you got 12, 13 maybe songs. Good rule of thumb is one song takes about 5 minutes between the song time plus transition time. You'll still, the longer your presentation gets, want to add up the minutes. There are tools online that's easier to add up like times of songs, or sometimes if you're on your playlist, it'll tell you how long it is in minutes. Because I can't tell you how many times I've tried to add up base 10 and then base 60 for minutes. It's really annoying. But nevertheless, it's something worth considering the longer your presentation goes, because the worst thing you could do is, like at San Diego Fair, you have a set list that you really love, and then you had too much material and you just get cut off at the end and you couldn't finish your set list. You want to be intentional and not be rude to whatever venue is hosting you.
Right. Yep. And something to think about as well for song length is some songs can be like 7 minutes, like, an average Carmen song is like 15 minutes long. Yeah. But so to think about those longer songs as well being thrown in there. Most songs end up being about a little bit over 4 minutes. And then you also have transition time to throw in there. So I usually just like to say 5 minutes a song.
Right.
And then of course that does average out for if you have like, 4-minute songs and then a 7-minute song, that averages out to, a little bit under 5 minutes plus transition time. You're still looking at 5 minutes.
I will say as a add a note here, don't kill your presentation with transition times. It's something worth practicing, making sure your team can get to the next spot within, I would say, 20 seconds.
Right.
Obviously, props can matter and things happen, but you want to get there because not only is it killing your allotted time to actually present, you also are killing your audience because nothing happening on stage.
Yeah, you're killing the momentum of
exactly
the set list.
And so you want either if you have a speaker, then that's a natural transition. I honestly love if you have a speaker in between that's only like a 20 to 30 seconds, so it fills the natural time without adding overbearing on that audience there. But yes, be aware of that. Get to your positions quickly and practice those things.
Yep. And to think about like some ratios of what you're kind of looking at, I would never go above maybe like if you have an hour-long presentation, I would never go above maybe 3 songs. I'm doing like 1 to 3. I feel like 2 is kind of that sweet spot on where you'd want to go. Because the introductory, celebratory type songs are great. And I also wouldn't use them in succession. So like typically it's to break up the mood. Like we'll get into the classic presentation structure, but like you might have, you know, a couple of fun songs throughout, like we'll say the first half, and then kind of breaking up the monotony of like, you know, here's a fun celebratory song, and then here's, you know, gospel. Here's a fun song, right? And gospel.
I honestly consider for a public venue of 60 minutes, I honestly consider it like 4 audiences of 15 minutes because most public people don't like stay for that long.
That's
and
true.
So you basically have 4 15-minute set lists, and in that case, yeah, you have like just mini plot lines where you're getting the gospel and good messages for people and all throughout the whole thing.
Yep. And then with especially the longer presentations, you'll tend to have more songs, and thus also more application type songs. I would make sure that you don't go really heavy handed for just a couple of songs, especially during the latter half, for application for good, strong messages and stuff.
Yep.
And then the middle area is all filled with, I like to call them fillers. I feel like that's an incorrect term.
Right. They're not filler, they are content driven.
Yes,
songs.
they are the content, the body of the message of the gospel. Those are the concepts that are being, you know, filled throughout them.
Right. Sin, savor, salvation type of songs.
Yeah, exactly. So these are songs that touch on something pertaining to the gospel, but maybe are deliberately incomplete. And it's okay because like we have all these songs that are, you know, about this and this and this and this. And it's like, okay, so you take a few that work best for understanding sin. Take maybe 1 or 2 here that understand salvation, 1 or 2 that are a relevant modern issue, you know, things like that. So you put those together. Those are your filler songs, the body of your content.
Yep. And with the longer presentations too, having a song that is both a maybe backup song and also a backup cut song. If you have let's say a 60-minute set and you think you have enough time, and so you pick 13 songs and you're getting halfway through your set and you're like, you know what, we over budgeted or we're going too long because of a speaker or something. This is the song that everyone knows to cut. And so the person in the back of the audience is just like, cut the song. And so everyone knows, okay, skip this song or whatever. And if you all agree, this is the song you're going to cut ahead of time, there's less confusion on stage. We've also had it where our time got cut a lot. And so the person went up on stage and it wasn't a planned speaker, but then like, thank you so much for your presentation. We're going to do our last song. And so everyone got the cue like, oh, we're moving to the last song now. It can be an easy way, just a plan of that thing. So which ones to cut, or a backup song of, if we have extra time, this is the song we'd throw in. Have you ever had an encore happen? I think we've had one encore ever.
I think maybe once.
It's very rare for what we do. But if you have an encore, you can have an encore song. You're like, this is the song that we're going to do if we have an extra time.
Thinking about the timing and stuff, consider the speaker.
Yes.
Because especially if you're going to have like a mini gospel message, somebody who actually has like content that they're going to speak about, make sure that is allotted into your time as well. And then like you were saying with transitions, make sure that if you have time between songs, you also consider that meshed in with the transition. But if the speaking is going to go a little bit longer than the transition would take, just something to think about.
Yep.
Timing wise.
All right. With all these considerations, something that we should also consider is picking songs for the session. Kind of basically what we've been talking about. You just consider all these factors when picking songs that your team's going to learn over a given amount of time and how long your session runs. And so you want to make sure that looking at your session, not all of your songs are just modern issues, or not all your songs just are about sin. Man, I love talking about sin, but not that much. Okay, get the whole gospel.
Sin is great.
Yeah. No, and so just having that awareness. Sometimes what we do is we kind of have our list of what songs we do as a team, and then 1 or 2 people will go through that list. They'll pick like, oh, these would be good to do for in general reasons. They'll maybe pick 20 or 25 off that list, and then we'll go, okay, we need to get our songs down to maybe like 13 or 15 songs for the session. And then we'll say, well, of these songs, we're missing this part of the gospel, or we're missing this aspect, or something that, we're going to do presentation for these people. So let's have a song that's relevant for them. That kind of idea where you're just picking based on who your potential audiences are going to be.
Right. Yep. And that should be done usually at the beginning of the session. And think about like the different aspects of the gospel. So first of all, Jesus died for your sins.
What?
This crazy concept.
Shock value there.
Is that present in the songs that you're learning? Now, it might sound like, well, obviously it's going to be. And well, I'd say, yeah, like half of them half of the mime songs seem to have something.
But just
like that.
because you have Jesus be crucified, like through half your songs, doesn't mean you hit on the concept.
Right.
Also, I don't recommend that half your songs have Jesus always dying on the cross or like this brutal, like, we get it, okay? Like, get to the content of why that matters. So just be aware. We actually have that as a separate category of crucifixions. Some of them are lighter, like Celebrate the Day, where he's just in a cross in the back, and there's not like any gruesome death or anything. It's just, he died. And those we kind of count, but recognize that they're lighter. But you don't need like 5 Via Dolorosas in your set list.
That'd be great. Just do Via Dolorosa like 5 times in a row.
We'll do, I don't know. I'm trying to think of ones that are like Via Dolorosa, like This Blood, Via Dolorosa, Go. Like, just gonna do all the crucifixions.
Just really, really straight to the point. And Jesus dead. No, but then also other parts of the gospel, think about like how life under Jesus is better, even when it's not fun. So like the Christian application of, what it looks like to be saved, what it looks like to be in a fallen world, those kinds of concepts. What about considering something greater than yourself? So this is especially touching on sin, but also on, like, you could say the sovereignty of God, like who God is. So these are all just facets of the gospel. No, it's not a conclusive list, of course, but like the different points of the gospel. Like you look at a song, you figure out its message and be like, okay, so this hits on, A, B, C, D part of the gospel. Now, do we have a complete cohesive message that we're wanting to present, or is everything touching on the same part of theology?
Yep. I'd also recommend picking songs that are not just your broad spanning, cross or creation to cross kind of songs, but ones that hit on aspects of the gospel throughout. So that way it's a flow of thought and you're not just hitting on creation to cross 5 times, but instead you've hit one song that maybe hits on creation really well, and then a song that talks about sin or the development of how those things worked, if you're maybe going chronologically, some Old Testament stories, and then you can get to like Jesus's life and Christian application, kind of a natural flow of each individual part. Something else that's also worth considering as you are practicing these songs, we talk often about the difference between presentability and polish. Those are 2 different standards, and sometimes when you're at training camp or at a practice, you can really want to work hard on this one song to get it polished to look really nice. But that's not always the best thing to focus on. You might have one song that's really polished, but like 5 other songs that are not clear on the gospel and are not what I would call presentable. So you want to make sure that before you present, all your songs are at least presentable, and as you have time, making sure that they are then polished. That standard is a little hard because that means like what techniques or what decisions do you need to work on. For one of the songs, Healing Begins, there's the second verse where the friend comes through the door and there's some transition that happens. That's a very hard logistic scene that I spend extra time there, not to try to make it polished necessarily, but to make sure that people understand what just happened in that scene of the friend finding out that the person like had left sin out and that they've realized some secret about their life. If that's not clear, the story doesn't really develop and you don't understand what just happened. Sometimes that presentable standard is something that is like a technique they need to work on, where if you don't understand that they are creating a wall or an object, it won't make sense what's happening in that scene. So sometimes you have to work on technique, and sometimes working on technique is more of a polished thing. Often when you're trying to do things synchronized, it can be a polished thing. But for the song like Different Drum, that's not really a polished thing, even though it looks really cool. You wouldn't be able to tell who is different if they weren't all synchronized. So in that case, presentability needs to be in sync. And so it really depends on what you're working on.
So it's definitely a sliding scale, very case by case on what is presentable versus polished.
The question that I ask as a director then is, for this song, what would be necessary to make it presentable right now? Or what parts are not clear from the audience? And then after that, you get the joy of working on polishing it and making it look really cool, which is the fun part. Nobody likes running the song 5 times just because Billy can't remember his part. But that's okay. You have to do that. If you do whatever you need to help Billy out. Sorry, Billy. I don't know how to just pick Billy. We've never had a Billy.
Billy, you're terrible. Hate you.
Wow. Harsh words. I love you, Billy, even though I've never met you. Okay, well, that's everything that we have for presentation considerations as far as the songs and thinking through everything. as always, we need to match that like scribe. Ha, I got you. You weren't ready for that. Ha.
I'm useless. Why am I even here anymore? I don't know.
Well, you can do the outro.
Okay, well, that's fine. And as always, go down into the description and you can find all kinds of cool things that you can click on. That is links.
I spend time on those, okay? So like go find all the timestamps. I'm the one who does that.
Yeah, he does.
He does like 99% of the work of the editing, and I do the descriptions.
It's even split.
It's totally easy.
Yep. And as we've talked about, fun things, those will be in the description. And as always, I'm Charleton.
I'm Samuel.
Breaking the line. That did feel really weird, like me going first with that.